Actually, I'd like to try something this time. I'm wondering if I can like stop and start the YouTube feed now that it's streaming so that I can pause and show you guys videos and then come back without getting in YouTube jail, which I got in YouTube jail a lot this semester. Yay, we had fun. Okay, but we're doing final review today, and I wanted to start by telling you all the questions that we're going to review, and then I will break down each one. So we are, let me make sure that's muted. And then we're going to go over here. Okay, so there's 4 questions on your final exam, written exam part, right? The multiple choice part is broken off so that you can take that whole multiple choice section and then take a bio break and then come back to the 4 questions. You only have to do 3 of the 4 written essay prompts, so you can pick one to skip. And they are, number 1, an individual artist or group's flipping or twisting of stereotypes. Describe how an artist's dance movements displayed and contradicted the dominant culture's stereotypes. For example, Bojangles was expected by the dominant culture, mainstream culture, to wear blackface and to play servants. But he refused to wear blackface. He dressed in tuxedos, and although he did sometimes play servants in films, he challenged the stereotype of being lowbrow that was expected to him. So I'm going to go deeper into an example to explain how that is. But remember that the key things for the question number 1 is you want to focus on how the actual dance movements and performances are flipping the stereotypes, right? So I'll get more into that in a moment. Question number 2. You're going to trace the lineage of a style or genre of dance over 3 eras. So you need to start with a dance. It should be a fairly recent dance, like in the last 30, 40 years. And you're going to trace back or give us your opinion on movement styles or examples from actual dances that you see reflected in that dance that are from 3 different eras. So you can't just pick a hip hop video from 2015 and tell us only about hip hop dances that influenced it from the 80s and 70s. You need to go back from, where's our list? It's not on this page. 2. Is it on this page? It's on this page. So for the lineage question, you need to go back and use 3 out of 4 of these eras in order to fulfill the rest of the requirement. Yeah, so you can talk about post-civil rights era, the jazz age, World War I and World War II, Reconstruction in early 1900s, or pre-Civil War era. So you need a source movement from each of those 3 things. This is the short version of the questions, and it's on this page that we're looking at here. It's on the selecting your final exam essay topic, so that's why it's a bit vague here. But for this question, the lineage or style of a genre of dance, jazz dance, what I'm looking for is you can choose just 1 example dance or 2. It's better to do 2 because it gives you more to go on. And then hello, I'm going to mute ya. So you're going to choose 1 or 2 dances from within one of these styles, and then you go back to the 3 eras before. So that's question number 2. Question number 3, caste and economic equality. So this one you're really going to focus on like specific legal obstacles that were happening for a particular dancer or performing group and how they were overcome by that particular dancer or performing arts group. And what you want is to choose someone who is a person of color in America that relates to the historical issues about economy and racism in America that we have been discussing in class. Okay, and then question number 4, your 4th option is talking about reclaiming sexual or gender identity. And I put LGBTQ on this question to lean you in that direction. I would prefer that you talk about trans and gay folks for this question. But if you really want to talk about feminism, especially fourth wave feminism, sex positivity issues, that is also an option for question number 4. And that one also you are going to, it's kind of a combo of 1 and 3. You are going to talk about the legal obstacles that are being forced upon a particular group because of their sexuality or gender identity, and then you're going to talk about how their dance moves are addressing or talking back to that restraint. Yeah, hi Katie, welcome back. Okay, so that's what we're going to cover today. This is the final exam essay questions page. All of this is in, all of this is in module 17. I just want to give you a visual on where to find things. Hello? Hello? Are you rolling? Internet's a little slow today, sorry. Okay, yeah. So the pages we were just looking at, final exam essay questions, is this one, and this is the one with the proper in-depth detail. Yeah? The short versions, this version of the essay questions is where you guys are throwing out your ideas for what you want to write on, and I graded all of those as of last night. I think one more person posted, but I also posted replies to some of these in the actual discussion, so you can see a little bit of my thinking on whether you guys have made choices that are going to let you do a deep dive or not. I'm not too brutal in my responses, but I am going to be hopefully looking to see that you guys are integrating the things that we've learned about, sorry, why is that still on? It's not, okay. About our historical, social, political instances. So I know some of you guys are choosing, for example, K-pop stars, and you could definitely use a K-pop star to talk about the lineage. Like in here, you could do K-pop would fall under jazz funk after 1980, so you could absolutely write about that as a style or genre of dance and then look back at the influences of that. But in general, just make sure you have enough to go on so that you can talk about dance movements, social political issues, and link all of that together. Okay, so I'm getting a little abstract. Let me pull myself back in. We have our questions. You know where to find our questions. Don't need that Zoom page open. And then this page right here with the worksheets that you can use to help your study guides. This is on the assignment for this week, the peer review final exam study guide assignment, which is due Wednesday night. Okay. Let's get started with question number 1. So focus on an individual artist or group's performances. And I'm going here. So let me make this nice and big for y'all. Describe how an artist's dance movements displayed and contradicted the dominant culture's stereotypes. Do not use Bojangles. I'm about to use Bojangles as our example. I want you to focus on mainly the dances, and here's sort of the topics that I want you to hit on. And when you do your peer reviews, you're going to notice that these are the rubric scoring points, which is the same rubric that I will be using to grade your final exam essay questions. So for history, in your answer, I want to make sure that you have written down society's expectations for people within that either racial ethnic group and or class, meaning economic class, or caste, and or gender. What did mainstream society expect and of that person? So for example, we're talking about Bojangles as our example. Let me bring you over to my note page. Sorry for the scrolling. Nope. Oh, do I not have Bojangles saved here because we've done it so many times? I don't. Okay, good. We can just work. So Bojangles was working When he was a child, he was dancing for the Whitman sisters, but most of his career was as a young man and middle-aged and older man in New York City, starting, well, he toured internationally as well, right? But he started out in the early 20th century, so like early 1900s. He became super mega famous in the 1920s, let's say. And he had his own starring role in his Broadway show, The Hot Mikado, by 1940s, 50s. He's already in mainstream Hollywood films, right? So in the first half of the 20th century, the the history of that time is that there was still legalized segregation, right? We were talking about an era that is post Reconstruction and during and after the Great Migration, right? So Reconstruction was the really good times after the Civil War, where Black Americans had been free, and that era of Reconstruction, they had lots more rights and they were taking part and being able to hold elected office. And then after Reconstruction ends is when you get into serious Jim Crow era lynchings, KKK. So in your mind, roughly, you're thinking about the era that's kind of sort of late 1880s through Great Migration, which I always think of as around 19 teens, World War I. So you can start out in your mind by thinking of Bojangles as having been coming up during Jim Crow era, segregation, lynchings. The second half of his career was after Great Migration, when Black folks spread out throughout the country, because remember, most of them had lived in the South, and even though people were not being lynched, there was still voter suppression and redlining, so it was hard to get a loan to buy a home in a nice neighborhood. There was still bullying, and segregation happened socially all over the place in the North, but it was like a law in the South. That doesn't mean it wasn't kind of happening in the North as well. It was still not cool. And then civil rights, right, is the 1960s. So that is sort of, Bojangles is pretty much, he's probably retired by that point if he hasn't passed already. And so you're not talking so much about the civil rights era. You're talking about before that. Okay, so that is how you locate yourself for history. Stereotypes. So in the Jim Crow era, we still are dealing with a lot of like leftover minstrelsy ideals, right? In the Jim Crow era, Black performers were still expected to wear blackface on stage. They were still dealing with the quote-unquote two-colored rule, which means that Black performers were not supposed to be solo artists. They were supposed to always have another person on stage with them, so they didn't become so independently famous that they could steal the show, and Bojangles broke that glass ceiling. And then for Black men during the Jim Crow era, the stereotypes that society expected him to do were to embody the stereotypes of Black minstrelsy. So they expected Black performers to wear shabby clothes, to act stupid, to act goofy or unrefined, or to act savagely or hypersexually. And Bojangles rejected all of those stereotypes and instead changed, like, his particular form of jazz dance, instead of being as down and hoofy and grounded and earthy as tap dance had been before then, his movements were upright. He was always standing up gracefully. He was gliding across the floor. His tapping was really quick and light. He was climbing up and down stairs. So he was elevating himself in class symbolically through that stair dance, and he was always wearing tuxedos. And so those stereotypes he was flipping, right? Society expected him to be a low class, to act low class and to appear and act ignorantly, and he flipped those stereotypes by becoming a solo performer whose movements were upright, elegant, graceful, and even when he had to accept a role because it was big popularity, like for example with Shirley Temple when he's playing the butler, he's still dressed elegantly, standing upright, and creating a genuine friendship with Shirley Temple's white female character, which had never been seen on film before in the world, right? That they hold hands and be friends. A black man and a white girl was not permitted on screen before Bojangles did that project. So that's another way in which he broke stereotypes, right? He's not a hypersexualized man trying to creep on everybody. He's like a genuine friend and mentor to a superstar little white girl. All right, so the movements choreography in that example would be talking about the way that he changed from hoofing to tapping, the style of dancing he did. And he was using tap dance. Oops, sorry. He was using tap dance, which is a dance that we know evolved from social dances and buck and wing dancing from early American people who were enslaved, and also from the formerly enslaved people who had come with the African diaspora and intermingled with tenant workers from Ireland. So the tapping from Irish step dance mingled with that. So he is still continuing the legacy of his people in tap dance, but he's modified it to make it more upstanding and elegant. So was Bojangles authentically representing the experiences of characters he portrayed? Was there appropriation in his work? And the answer is yes. He's a black man. He's playing black characters in his work. But the answer is also, when you talk about The Hot Mikado, The Hot Mikado is a Broadway show that's full of tap and jazz numbers. The dancing is all very Black American. But the costuming is, the play itself is sort of a parody or a remake of a Rodgers and Hammerstein play about Japanese. It's set in Japan with Japanese characters initially, and so it's weird because the original play is appropriative, and then Bojangles is kind of appropriating that Japanese culture that was appropriated by British people, and so there's a lot of complicated layering that happens in there. And it's okay to just say that and acknowledge that, right? And we described how their movements were unique and or different from other dances in this style. That's again that question about how Bojangles changed tap dancing by the style in which he did tap. All right, so let me pause there for a second and let me screen share the worksheet. That's not the worksheet page. Is this the worksheet page? No, that's the big question. This is the worksheet page. Okay, so what I just did was sort of talk through what I might write for that essay. It was a little bit yammery, but we hit all of those points. So when you're doing your own studying, you might want to sort of talk through or write out an example answer. And then you want to use your worksheet to pare it down into the notes that you can bring with you into writing. Because remember, writing your short exam questions it's not like you pre-write your essays and then turn in your paper via the quiz. That's not it. And also, of course, we don't want to use AI because these questions, most of them are designed to not be well answered by AI. Also, I have an AI checker, in case you were wondering. There's little AI checkers that I use, and also copying checking. So just heads up that I do all of that. So when you're helping yourself not plagiarize, the way to do that is to take in the content. We've been doing that all semester. Try writing it out long form or talking it out like I just did. And then you're going to return to this essay worksheet and basically make sure you have all of these items on your note sheet, and that will jog your memory so you can write it all out quickly in your final exam. So for the first one, I asked for 2 examples. Well, I asked you to choose an individual or artist or group to focus on, but you need example performances to use to support your theory. So describe the movements of particular dance or performing artists that we covered in this class and how their performances address social issues. Their time, your answer should focus mainly on the dances they perform, not on their personal life. So in here, I might put Bojangles' stair dance, right? I mentioned the stair dance and how the movement up and down the stairs is symbolic of his surmounting cast obstacles. And I also mentioned his stair dance with Shirley Temple in The Little Colonel. So I might put a video link to each of those things here in this part of the worksheet so that I would know in my head that I could reference them. Movements. I see there's a chat, so I'm going to check that in a hot second. These are the same questions as the Vet Your Dances. There's just a little bit more detail in the official questions, so I'll review that. Thanks, Natasha. I'll make sure I clarify that part. Okay, so for movements, and this is just the text that's in both of those two places, describe the movement, similarity, cultural influences, and authenticity in their references. So you have example dance 1, you can leave yourself a little note here. So in this example that we did, we said example dance 1 was the stair dance, and so you could say, Bojangles' footwork up the staircase is really light and his body is upright because he's signifying that he, as a black man, can be elegant and socially mobile. And then on this one, we talked about our example number 2 is going to be the Shirley Temple dance, and you could say that his dance choreography involves holding hands with Shirley Temple, and they're doing a call and response where they're basically like teaching each other or sharing dance steps with each other, demonstrating their humanity towards each other, their affection towards each other, and this was breaking the boundaries of social expectations about the friendship between a black man and a white woman, especially a white child. So that's how those movements are supporting your argument. Flipped stereotypes. So in number 1, which is Bojangles' stair dance, you can talk about how he is wearing a suit, how he refuses to wear blackface, how he, instead of doing, remember we saw some old Josephine Baker movements that were really like sort of angular and down into the earth when she was doing the stereotypical dances or the dances that were expected of her, like when she did the dance that was plantation themed, or the way that she was moving her hips and flirting in the banana dance was society expecting her to be hypersexualized and savage, right? Those are the stereotypes placed on a black woman. So those stereotypes are also placed on black men, and instead of Bojangles flirting with the audience or like tipping his head, remember like Earl Snakehips Tucker is really sensual in his dancing, but Bojangles rejected all of that because he knew that it was what the society expected, and instead he was like upright, clean cut, no nasty business at all in his dancing. He's just moving up the stairs, making all the different tones and acting with precision in his tap. Stereotype number 2, he took a lot of flack. Bojangles took a lot of flack for playing a role that was a butler, because that's a stereotypical role for a black man to perform in, right? A servant. And yet he didn't just say, yes, ma'am, and like bow down to the white characters in the movie. He looked them in the eye. He held hands with her. They interacted as equals. And so he took that stereotype of the black butler and made it, and performed it with dignity through his body language and physical interactions. And then social political content, you want to make sure that you are clear on the era of this performer. That's how we started, right? We talked about his performing career lasting mostly through the first half of the 20th century, and that was mostly the Jim Crow laws era, so segregation, redlining, two coloreds rules about how many black performers need to be on stage. Those are the legal obstacles that they faced, especially redlining and segregation of performing arts venues and hotels, as well as the risk of being lynched or arrested for just hanging out on the street, because there were laws in the South during the Jim Crow era that said that you couldn't be unemployed and a black person, but if you were out of towner and there was no one to vouch for your employment, then the cops could just arrest and harangue you in that time. Okay, so that's how we are filling out this first spreadsheet or worksheet, yeah? And then to Natasha's question. Okay, so this is the page final exam essay questions. Boop, boop, boop. Final exam essay questions right here. And then the next one is that's what we're doing right now. The essay study guide assignment is the one that is due. Here, I'm going to put this here so I can remember. Natasha, you were asking about this assignment, which is the essay topics vet your dances. So I just put like the short version of each of the 4 question options here so that you guys could throw out some ideas together. And those same 4 this is the long detailed version of the questions you're going to be answering, 3 out of the 4 of the options. So here on the vet your dances or subjects for the final exam page, you can see that it's just individual artists. It's really short. The long version here shows you in detail the elements that I'm looking for. Yeah? Does that help clarify that? Okay, cool. All right, so let's go on to which one do we want to do next? I guess we'll just go in order. Okay. So oh, that's what that is. Let's take a little pause here and watch a video for fun. Okay, so I have somewhere in here. Good grief, I opened a lot of videos, y'all. There we go. Okay, it's a little fun break. This is Beyonce's halftime show.
Ladies, now let's get information. Who to me, you got some coordination. You just might be up like Bill Gates in the making. Alabama, Louisiana. You mix that Negro with that Creole, make the Texas Bama.
So, in this moment here, there was that jump there, and I was like, oh, great. Now I'm probably kicked off of YouTube. In that jump there, we see Beyonce. She's at the Super Bowl, right? So there's already a field to start her off with. But if you were using that, for example, for the first question, how is she flipping stereotypes? She is a black woman, but she is not, she's not acting innocent or pink or sweet. She is culturally representing through the costuming and the stepness of the hip hop dances, right? The tradition, the Southern tradition of step dancing, and big band dancing, a la, sorry, I'm having a brain fart here. The crews of Mardi Gras that do marching band choreography, color guard teams, This is a African American tradition in this country, so she's representing those step dancing elements in her movement, and of course the hip movement that we now think of as twerking that comes from Congolese and Mutwashi movements, right? So she's got layers of essentially blackness in movement layered into that dance. And so you could dig that example for either the first question about flipping stereotypes, right? She's not a pretty girl. She's not an innocent teen anymore. She's not just highlighting herself on stage, like, for example, Celine Dion, who is also a diva. But when Celine Dion performs, she's like usually standing still and being quote unquote elegant. Beyonce is taking all the expectations that we put on her and exploding them or flipping them, right? She's not just a superstar, she's a goddess. When she was doing her pregnant performances, everything was like shaped after goddess iconography, and in that halftime Super Bowl, it's all very like militaristic, Black Power, Black Panthers. And this was 2019, I think. It was either 2019 or 2018. So that would be a fine example of something that you can pick that is early. So let's move on to our second question. And we're going to, and the second question is really about chasing legacy. So in the midterm, you had an option of this question, and I thought it was really interesting that you guys didn't pick it, because I think it's a easy home run. But I think it can feel a little intimidating because maybe y'all are afraid to make a mistake about calling out the wrong dance. But if you're working with dances that we have already talked about in the semester, you're in pretty safe grounds to connect them. So in the midterm, I asked you to pick one dance and identify 3 sources. In the final, you're going to pick a style. So you're going to pick 1 or 2, probably 3 examples from one particular style of jazz dance or jazz funk or hip hop. That's fine too. And you need to pick these examples relatively recently so that you can go back, way back in time, 3 different eras, right? So you're going to pick one of these styles. Broadway style jazz dance, so after 1940. Jazz funk, which is jazz where jazz and hip hop are like overlapping, basically music video dancing a la Janet Jackson and Beyonce. So after 1980. Tap after 1940, hip hop after 1980, voguing after 1980, or heels dance, which is in the last 20 years. And you're going to describe at least 3 phrases of movement or repeated moves as examples. So you want to start with your selection for question number 2. You should have 2 or 3 music videos, or 2 or 3 performance videos that you're going to talk about that are in one of these jazz styles. Yeah, so you don't want to pick one hip hop and one tap dance. You want to pick things that look the same, and then you're going to go back from there. So when you're going back in time, you want to make sure that you go back to 3 very different time eras. And so pick 3 eras out of this from whence your source movements come. Yeah. And then you're also going to talk about the community of the dance that the source movement came from. And that part can be pretty brief. Okay. All right. Now I'm going to see if I can pause my YouTube stream while we watch videos and come back on it. So just before I do that pause, I'm going to show through share screen the videos we're going to watch, and then I'm going to pause YouTube and then give us a little more viewing time. Okay, so here we go. So we are going to watch, for our starting example, one of the things we're going to watch is this Dua Lipa levitating performance, which has multiple parts in it, but it references a lot of older dance videos. And we're also going to look a bit at this Doja Cat performance from the BBMAs. And then we're going to not look at that. We're going to look at Bob Fosse's The Rich Man's Frug. There's a couple of different versions of that. We're going to talk about Madonna's Material Girl. We're going to talk about Marilyn Monroe and Jennifer Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, Diamonds Are a Girl's Best Friend. We're going to talk about Roxy Hart in Chicago. This is another version of Roxy on Broadway, performed by Brandy. This is quite a split freeze frame, I apologize. And a performance from Moulin Rouge by Nicole Kidman? Is that her last name? And then a hot second to touch on 42nd Street, okay? So, I'm going to stop my YouTube for a moment.